And I have really been looking forward to our guest today, who's the author of Caregiving with Confidence, Take the Guesswork Out of Caregiving. And this is one panel member that I have known for years. And I have always been impressed with the accomplishments in her career. And I know you are too. And so I'd love to welcome Pam to the stage so we can get to know her a little bit better and then dive into this new book that she's written. So Pam, great to see you. And
Good to see you too.
Congrats on writing this new book. And we will dive into that book. But before we do that, I would love to let our audience get to know you a little bit better. You've got one of the most interesting career paths that I've ever heard about in our industry. But walk us through sort of, you know, what you've done to sort of lead you to writing this book.
Yeah, sure, Steve. Well, thank you. You're too kind. My background has primarily been in the senior living and healthcare industry up to this point. I got interested in the field based on my own personal family experience as a teenager, caring for my grandmother who had Alzheimer's disease and doing our best to keep her in the home setting, and then ultimately transitioning her to Alzheimer's care. And, you know, just kind of watching the struggles my family went through, my father and my aunt, really got me, you know, thinking that there's got to be a better way. There has to be more solutions for people who are struggling with these things. So I got intrigued in getting into the field. I went to school for social work, and then I decided to start my career in nursing homes, actually, is where I started. So I've done a little bit of everything in that field. Started in nursing homes, worked my way through the administrator and training program in a skilled nursing facility. Then I transitioned over to senior living, ran a senior living facility for a few years after that. Then I decided to make the transition into home care. And really that was because working in senior living, I would hear a lot that, you know, we wish we could keep mom at home. We wish we could keep mom at home. And so I just felt like that was a natural progression to start a company to help people do that. So that was about 2013. I opened a home care company, Allegiance Home Care, and I operated that company for about 8 years before ultimately transitioning the sale of it to a company called Care Advantage, which also owns Capital City Nurses. So a lot of you who are local will probably be familiar with those companies. So after that transition, I was 36 years old and sold my home care company. So I kind of, I didn't really know what I was going to do next, but I just knew that I wanted to keep helping seniors and caregivers and continue contributing to some solutions for people who were struggling. So that got me interested in elder law. I kind of saw it as a way to shift more into the advocacy standpoint. I'd seen so many heartbreaking situations of crisis and just people being unprepared for their aging years. That I saw that as a good vehicle for me to transition into the advocacy side and helping people plan better for that stage of life.
Wow. And now one of the other credentials that you didn't mention is you've also been an aging life care manager or at least had that shingle up at one point in your career. When did you explore that as a credential?
Yeah, good question. So I actually simultaneously from opening my home care company pursued that credential. I thought at the time it would make sense to have a company that did both. Mm-hmm. And so I was, pursuing that, thinking I would do, kind of the work of care management along with having a home care company. And I just found that, spreading myself too thin didn't really work out so well. And it made sense for me to focus on the operations of the home care company. So I also found a really great network within the aging life care community, very supportive, very helpful. People that were, helped me as I was building my home care company to give me feedback and give me advice and, share client, situations with and collaborate. So just kind of naturally transitioned into not doing the work, but just kind of being more of a part of the community in a different way.
I love it. And what I love about your career path, and it really speaks to you as a person, is that you're on this journey, and you, as opposed to just staying right on that path, you're always looking at a different way that you could help people, drawing on the experience that you had there. Is that, you know, you're in senior housing and you're seeing how you could help people age in place, and then you're aging in place, and then you're and using all that experience to reflect on, you know, financial and legal aspects of this journey. It's wonderful. And now the thing that I really commend you on, and I think is super exciting for you as an individual, but more so for us as a profession, is that you're going to law school.
Yeah. I'm excited, a little terrified, but yeah, I will be starting that. It's been something I've been thinking about doing for quite a while, and so, you know, took the time to explore the opportunity and look into it, and but yeah, I'm taking the leap and going to law school starting next fall. So
Wow, this is real. I'm thrilled for you, and
thank you.
there's very few people that have taken a path like you have in our
Mm.
profession. But whenever I meet with a young med student or a law student, I always ask them, "Hey, would you consider, you know, working with older adults as your
Yeah.
profession when you graduate?" And I usually get this blank stare. And I mean, I think our law schools and our med schools and universities in general need to be uh, uh, do a better job of recruiting young students into this,
Absolutely.
better
Yeah.
serving this profession. But the fact that you are doing this is amazing. You truly are a Swiss Army knife, and have an amazing perspective. And when you graduate, and I have no doubt that you're going to serve clients well. And I understand this is going to be a program, even though you're in Northern Virginia, it's Syracuse University, because it's one of the
Right.
few programs in the country that has an elder law track.
They do have elder law classes available, and they've also made it easy to participate from afar with the hybrid model that they've come up with. So it works well for both my career goals and my family situation. So yeah,
Great,
it's a
great.
good fit.
Okay. Well, what a cool background. This is one of the
Well,
reasons I was
thank you.
looking forward to learn a little bit more about your background. But today
Yeah.
we're gonna talk about your book. And before we dive into that, tell us, like, what possessed you to write this book, and a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, well, I think possessed is a good word. I I don't know that gosh, writing a book is probably not something I would recommend to anyone. It's not an easy thing to do. In fact, it took me probably I've been saying 5 years, but I think it was more like 6 or 7. Really what happened was, you know, as I was working with clients over the years, I just discovered such a need for education and support. And so what it started with was actually a blog. I started writing a blog while I had my home care company, and I just put out an article or two a month, you know, about different topics that I would get questions about from clients and their families. And over time, it just built up. And then when I sold the home care company, I thought, well, why not take all this content I've put out there on this blog and, you know, create a book out of it? Maybe I can reach more people that way. And so just really wanted to create something that would help people, that I could, you know, put everything that I've learned over the years to some good use, and hopefully reach a broader audience that way.
I love it. All right, so let's dive into this. And first off, what I'm going to share on the screen here is the website where you can learn a little bit more about Pam, and it gives you easy access to the book. And I'm going to drop that into chat to make that convenient. And it's caregivingwithconfidence.com, the title of the book. And then if you click on this button, buy the book, you'll be redirected to the Amazon page that has the book, and you can, buy that. And Pam, one of the things that I love to do with our authors is do a little walkthrough of the table of contents. That always seems to be a great way to kind of get to better understand the content that's in there, but it's also a great talking point for the audience. And so for the folks in the audience, feel free to jump in with comments or questions as we kind of navigate through the chapters here. First off, Pam, like any sort of rhyme or reason to the organization of the book and why you selected these organizing it in this manner?
Yeah, it's one of the hardest things, I guess, like I mentioned, writing a book is quite an undertaking. And I think I organized and reorganized the chapters in the book probably 100 different times, trying to come up with the best way to present the material and the best flow of information. And I just found that, the easiest, or what I thought would be the easiest thing to do would be to present the information in chapters and categories and kind of set it up in a way where each chapter can be read independently on its own. If you pick up the book and you have a particular issue or crisis going on, you can go to the chapter that contains that information and read that and do the worksheets that are associated with it. Learn what you need to learn, and you can always move on, back up or move on to the other chapters later after you kind of get that situation under control. So I kind of laid it out in the best way I thought, in terms of progression, but it certainly is, you can certainly bounce around as needed.
Great. And so let's start with chapter 1, advocacy, which I certainly an important topic on that we've, an important thread, I should say, on a lot of these conversations that we have are related to having somebody to advocate for you, especially if you're
right.
sliding into this confusing healthcare situation. What are some of the tips or ideas that you might share with folks on advocacy?
Yeah, well, like I mentioned, that's really the culmination of all of my career has boiled down to what I'm most passionate about, is that advocacy piece. And what I've realized is that the advocacy part is not always, people aren't aware of it. They don't know that being a caregiver means being an advocate. And so it's needed much earlier in the process than people give attention to it. And so many times I hear things like, oh, mom's dementia is getting worse. And so now we're thinking, we need to go and step in, or we need to get a power of attorney or something like that. And oftentimes it's too late. It doesn't work that way. You're headed down a much more difficult path if you've waited that long. So it just seems like a lot of times our aging population gets overlooked and mistreated and underserved. And every caregiver really needs to view themselves up front as an advocate, understand what that means and what it involves, and make sure that they are empowered to step in and act on their care recipients' behalf when it's needed.
Now, I don't know if you dive into this, but one of the things that I've seen is that caregivers and family members are, in an effort to advocate for mom and dad, sort of slide into this parenting role of mom and dad that creates some resistance.
Yeah.
Have you encountered this, and any sort of ideas or solutions for folks to help them have a different perspective?
Yeah, Steve, I've encountered that a lot. It's one of the most common things I've seen. And I think I addressed that a little more detail in the environmental chapter, actually, when I start talking about, the aging in place and bringing home care into a home to support someone who has that wish, or when you're considering, moving into an assisted living facility or community. A lot of times when these conversations come up, there's a lot of pushback from
We'll
the
dive
adult.
back into that, because I think that's a great context to talk about that aspect of the changing roles of our relationships. So Chapter 2 is the medical and with a subchapter of caring for dementia. What are some insights that you can provide in those two areas?
Sure. Well, I think the medical aspect of everything is just, it's one area that can really snowball quickly. You start getting involved with doctor's appointments and medication management and, exercise and physical therapy and things like that. And it just, little things just start to become more and more overwhelming over time. And so, I focus in that chapter of the book, just really taking stock of what you can and can't handle in that area, really having a good grasp on your boundaries, what you're able to assist your care recipient with, and what you don't think you can do. The better you understand yourself and your boundaries and your capabilities, then the better prepared you'll be to bring in help when you need it. I just think that it often, it's one of those slippery slopes that is very easy to happen. People don't really understand the medical diagnosis that their aging loved ones have. They don't pay that much attention to it until it starts to become an issue. And again, like I talked earlier about, jumping in when things are already out of control, it creates that crisis situation. I also talk about dealing with the medical system in that chapter. It can be a nightmare, quite frankly. The medical community speaks another language, and it's very disjointed. And so just going in with the right expectations and kind of knowing the bear that you're facing, and being prepared, again, going back to the advocacy, to be the one that bridges the gap, be the one that makes sure the communication happens. Just making sure that you stay on top of those things, because they oftentimes, fall through the cracks if you don't.
Man, yeah, and I'll tell you, as you're sort of walking us through this journey, one of the most popular topics in our discussions is solo aging. And,
yeah,
one of the things to reflect on, if you're a caregiver, if you're concerned about a loved one, just imagine if mom didn't have somebody like you there to be along the journey and, advocating for yourself, especially if you're going through some health problems or an accident or injury. It can be very vulnerable, and it can be very challenging.
Yeah, and that's where I certainly would make a plug for the aging life care managers out there, right? I mean, if you don't have the family, or they're not local, or they're not involved, then, bringing in professionals to fill that gap is a really good idea, because like you said, advocating for yourself, especially when you're in a very vulnerable, frail, state, is not easy to do. And I will say, for the caregivers who are taking care of an aging adult, it's also not enough to rely on the aging adult to report to you, right? So the sooner you can get involved, going to the doctor's appointments, being present, reviewing the medical records yourself, those are again, getting the power of attorney and the medical proxy that allows you to do that. Those are the things that are going to help you kind of have an understanding of what's going on and be able to advocate better for your care recipient.
I totally agree. Now, let's see, Jerome has a great topical question related to the medical aspect. And he says, you recommend that families find a geriatrician or a physician that specializes in aging and geriatrics to provide medical care. And what are the alternatives there? I'm curious on your thoughts on that in terms of finding a physician that's qualified.
Yeah, I absolutely do. Unfortunately, as you mentioned earlier in this conversation, there's not a lot of them out there. Med schools don't really promote this as a career path. So the specialty, area is quite small. But, I have found that for a lot of aging adults, staying with the physician that has known them their entire life, that they have, been a part of that practice for years and years. And quite honestly, the medical doctor has aged with them. So, they've kind of been through the process with them. It doesn't always make sense to switch doctors, you know, if that doctor is doing a good job and has a really good understanding of their medical background. What matters is just asking the right questions and communicating well, to make sure that that continues to go seamlessly.
Yeah, and this kind of goes hand in hand with sort of the subchapter to chapter 2, the medical is caring for dementia, is that I think the most common question that I get is families that suspect that mom and dad have dementia, and
Yeah.
how do you navigate this if this is on your radar? Like what are some of your thoughts in that area?
Yeah, that is one area where I would say the regular family physicians don't have a lot, you know, necessarily to offer, depending on how much experience they have with it. And I highly suggest in the book, and when I talk to people, you know, the sooner you start to recognize those problems, the better to bring it up. And it definitely makes sense to see a neurologist, to see a professional, and to try to get to the bottom of what's going on earlier in the progression, so that you can really identify what you're dealing with. And there are some interventions you can take earlier in the process, and at least start getting yourself prepared for what's coming. So that's one area that, you know, and even just going to a neurologist isn't necessarily enough either. I mean, there are neurologists that specialize in this area as well. And so getting to the right doctor is critical.
Great. And okay, let's see. All right, now actually our next chapter here is the environmental, which you referenced that, and I'm assuming that is the where we live, and whether it be at home or in a community. Am I correct there?
Yeah, this is one of the biggest questions you get. You know, should mom stay at home or should she go to a community? And so this, I try to address in this chapter a little bit of both. I think either, you know, it's not enough to say, well, one is right and one's not. Either can be a good solution depending on your individual situation. Most of the time, this question is very difficult to answer up front. You know, each situation is different and there's a lot of things to consider. There's factors from all the categories I go over in the book that apply to making this decision. And I would say, you know, talking about it early, identifying, you know, what hurdles you might face with either possibility sooner in the process is really a key here. And just making sure that you have a plan B, that you're not so set on one option or the other that you forget to plan for the other one. I think we should always consider, what if aging place doesn't work? Then, you know, what about a community? If you haven't looked into that, you don't have any plan for that, and the time comes where it's needed, you know, it's hard to make those decisions in a time crunch. And, you know, just making sure that you have that second option in place.
Great. Let's see. I was just dropping in a resource for everybody. It's the Brain Health and Psychiatry Center. It's a great resource if you suspect memory impairment, and it's a really pretty innovative project there. Okay, let's see. We actually have a question related to assisted living. Is there a way to have Medicaid pay for assisted living? Most memory support units are under assisted living instead of nursing, so it's very difficult for families to pay, but nursing is not always the right level of care. What are your thoughts on that? I get questions like this all the time.
Yeah, you get the questions all the time, and so do I, because it's one of the most difficult areas to navigate. You know, yes is the answer to whether Medicaid can pay for assisted living. At least here in Virginia, there is Medicaid waiver for assisted living. The problem is there's no mandated requirement that assisted livings take those waivers or how they manage those types of waivers. And so it's really up to each individual company as to whether they offer that or not, and how they manage those. I find that a lot of the communities will, you know, work with clients that have kind of aged in place in their community first. If they run out of resources, to try and keep them there underneath a waiver, rather than admitting new clients under a waiver. And so that can make it difficult for someone who's looking for placement. And unfortunately, you do end up in the situation where, a nursing home that provides a secure dementia unit ends up being really the only option there. And the question asker is absolutely right. It's not always the most appropriate placement, but unfortunately, dealing with the financial system that we have, it's just one of
Yeah.
those things.
I've got a family member who's relatively young with Lewy body dementia, and the family has no money, and we're going through this right now, and it's heartbreaking because physically he's healthy. He doesn't need to be in a nursing home, but
Yeah.
cognitively he needs to be in a secure environment, and that's the only choice. And then
Yeah.
there's it's not easy to find those Medicaid beds if you don't have money, which is I'm
Even
assuming,
in a skilled nursing facility, they're few and far between.
yeah, and I'm assuming this question right here, which we've both heard many, many times, is probably one of the things that drew you into the elder law and that segment, because what is the solution? It's thinking about and it's planning for these things in advance. And
That's right. Yeah.
and what happens to us as family members is that if our loved ones don't do that planning, it
Right.
generally doesn't fall on their shoulders. It falls on the shoulders of the caregiver.
That's right. And it's the options are still limited, but when you plan in advance, it's much easier, like I said, to enter a facility privately paying and spend down and work with them on the front end to get qualified and approved for Medicaid when the time comes, and having those conversations up front and planning for it. It's much easier to transition that way versus, an emergency state of mom's in the hospital, she has no money, we need a place for her to go. And those are the situations where you see the really heartbreaking, where mom ends up 100 miles away from the rest of the family because that's the only bed they could find that would take them. And so it's it's again, I'm not saying, it opens unlimited options, because it certainly doesn't, but it can alleviate a lot of those burdens by just having that plan in advance.
I got my phone open here. For those of you that are on Zoom, I've been streaming these discussions on LinkedIn for the past couple of months, and I never realized how many questions and comments come on there. But we've got Heidi Weinberg. Yeah, we got Heidi Weinberg, who says that she's a personal trainer who works with older adults, and she says, I can tell you exercise, in particular strength training, is not emphasized enough. It's a huge factor for aging well. But Heidi, I agree, and thanks for joining us there on LinkedIn. Thanks to the other folks I see that are on there. But not only for the older adult, but for the caregiver, I think your chapter 6 is caring for the caregiver, but just the dealing with the stress and having that release, the physical release. And one thing that my eyes have been open to is just because your loved one has dementia, they can still function, and perhaps exercising together somehow, is a great way to be together and release some of that stress.
Yeah, I agree. And just like we talked about the geriatricians, just having the right professional, someone like the person who submitted that comment, who understands, the aging population and the challenges that they face, engaging with the right professional who can help guide you in that area. A lot of times it starts with a home health, like a physical therapy type of care, which can often be paid for through insurance, and then kind of transitioning into an exercise routine after that. But I agree with you, caregivers, the stress that caregivers experience can cause numerous ailments, even take years off of their lives. And it's one of the most heartbreaking things when you see a caregiver literally run themselves into the ground and end up with health problems. Sometimes I've seen caregivers pass away before their care recipient, have a heart attack or something else, because they're just not taking care of themselves. And so prioritizing your own health and wellness. You have to do it.
And the physical demands of transferring and things of that
Yeah.
nature can often lead the caregiver into the nursing home before the care recipient.
Right.
Nolan has a great comment, and I'd love your thoughts on this because again, I think it's one that is very important. And Nolan says, one of my challenges as a nurse case manager is balancing the wishes for self-determination for the parent and the fears of the adult parent for patient safety, so their lives are turned upside down when this unexpected health crisis occurs. And what Nolan says is competent older adults ultimately get to make their own choices, albeit bad or selfish at times. I sort of call this the line in the sand that we all have to be aware of, is that we are talking about adults here.
Yeah.
And your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it is important to emphasize, and it's one of the most important parts of as he mentioned, care management or case management, is understanding, that older adults are adults and they have autonomy and they are not children, and, we can't treat them that way. And so balancing that and explaining that and trying to advocate for the older adult to their adult children is one of our roles. And in my book, I do outline, I can't remember which chapter it's in, I'm sorry, but I outline some tips on, approaching the older adult that you can, give to the adult child that you're working with, different ways to approach the conversation, that might alleviate some of those stressors. But as you mentioned, there does come a point where the older adult does have the right to make bad decisions. And the adult children sometimes just have to let them make those choices, and face the consequences. And so
I think as a caregiver, that and a family member, the guilt that you feel and dealing with that, but at some point it has to be, hey, okay, this person is an adult, now this is where the whole dimension, the cognitive impairment comes
right in, of course. Yeah.
But a healthy adult who doesn't want to heed practical advice, you got to draw that line.
And sometimes bringing in a professional does help, because having a non-biased third party that can take on some of that, can be the bad guy if needed, or can at least relay the information in a way that the care recipient might be more receptive to. I can't count how many times I've had a conversation with an older adult. They've been very receptive. They've agreed to our plan and followed through on it. And then the family says, I don't know how you got them to do that. I don't know why they listened to you. I've been telling her this for 6 months, and it's, well, I don't have a magic pill. It's just that I'm not their daughter, right? Like I don't have that relationship. I don't have that history. We don't have the, the fallout, or, any of that doesn't come back on us. And so it just alleviates that stress, that tension. So again, another plug for that industry, but I just think that, bringing in that third party can oftentimes really make that go smoother.
And actually, this ties in nicely with Jerome Paulson's question is, can you expand on the role of an aging life care manager? When should one consider consultation? Is this only for people with loved ones in another community? Pam, you want to, because I think we dropped the aging life care moniker as though everybody knows what these folks do. But if you give Jerome a little bit of insight into that.
So that's a really good question about, is it only for those who have their loved ones in another community? I think it's frequently used in that scenario where, you don't live in the same city or state as your care recipient, so that you have eyes and ears that can be there for you and report back and be the advocate when you can't. So that's one prime, scenario where an aging life care manager or a similar professional can be helpful. But it's not just for that. And, it's for that sandwich caregiving person who is trying to balance all the other priorities in their life and cannot make caregiving for their aging adult 100% of their time. I don't know very many people who can do that, drop all the other responsibilities they have in their life and focus solely on that as much as we might want to. So an aging life care professional comes in and bridges that gap. They can be an unbiased, third party to come in and kind of mediate and help with the conversations. I like to see them as kind of a coach, for the team. We're all on the same team. Our goal is to have a positive aging and end of life experience for this individual. And so coming in and bringing everybody together, making the communication smoother, and explaining everything to all the different players on the team in a way that they can receive it, is really one of the primary, functions of an aging life care manager. And then a lot of the things I go through in the book as challenges that the caregivers face, the aging life care manager can help decode that. They can help, understanding like I was talking about, it's a different language in the medical field, right? So like helping them understand what's going on, helping them have a plan for the next step, and really just, being their advocate through the process.
I love it. And we're going to get back. I guess we're on chapter 3, moving through the book, but Angela Baker has a great talking point here in question. And she says, I'm an attorney, in fact, under power of attorney for my elderly aunt who has been a victim of a romance scam and continues to believe that this is a true romance. She's given away all of her money to this person, and all that remains is her Social Security, which I am managing so that she has funds to pay her bills. Have you dealt with a situation like this? I have found it very challenging to keep her from trying to circumvent all the protections I've tried to put in place. Angela, this is heart-wrenching, but it's also one of those things where it's kind of like, holy cow. Pam, got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, scams and fraud, it's just so prevalent, and we hear heartbreaking stories like this all the time. And I think we could go down quite a rabbit hole with that subject. Angela, I'd be happy to, if you want to email me, we can talk about this one-off, see if I can bring in some resources for you. It can get really hairy, and the individual circumstances certainly do play a huge factor there. So I don't really feel necessarily comfortable going too far down that topic on the webinar, but I'm certainly happy to connect with you offline.
Yeah, and another thing I put on into chat is just to introduce folks to the profession of daily money managers. And it may have not circumvented the situation that Angela is talking about, but
yeah.
What I found is these daily money managers, which is a great profession to sort of help with bookkeeping and paying bills and things of that nature. Oftentimes they discover these scams and see something on the credit card or discover it, and they're able, because they've got the trust of the older adult, they are able to help with that.
I think an overarching piece of advice is having your finger on the pulse of what's going on, right? And so like we talked about earlier, having the eyes and ears, whether that's a daily money manager, a care manager, whether it's yourself, but just really having your arms around what's going on, what's coming in, what's going out, you can pick up on red flags, earlier in the process.
Yep. All right, let's jump back to the table of contents here. And the next chapter is chapter 4, the social, which I can think of some elements that might be in that chapter, but share with us your thoughts on that chapter.
Yeah, I didn't have this chapter in the book originally. I found that there were subjects that were coming up in the different areas that warranted their own attention. But what I find it boils down to is, socialization is always a factor in any of these decisions. The risk of social isolation is just such a big problem in the elderly. And I wanted to offer some advice on how to combat that, whether the person is remaining to age in place at home or whether they're moving into a community. Making sure that they have the right level of socialization is really important for physical, spiritual, mental, all types of health. And so, it's one of the biggest factors I think people think about when they consider assisted living is, I don't want mom or dad to age in place at home and just be, just sit there by themselves and watch TV all day and not really do anything. And I get that, and that's a very valid reason. And oftentimes moving into a senior living community does alleviate that, and it is the right solution. But for some people, they aren't, overly social butterflies most of their life. And so to try to force them into a social situation when they're older doesn't really make a lot of sense either. So maybe more one-to-one opportunities might be better for that person. And so, I try and get the reader to think about their individual care recipient and the type of socialization that works best for them. And then having a plan, whether it's aging in place or senior living community, that meets those individual needs.
Yeah. And, one of the things that I found that there's a lot of positive things about the pandemic. Number one, we're meeting like this online, which we would have never done 5 years ago. But the other thing is how loneliness and isolation, how unhealthy loneliness and isolation is. And what I've found in the last couple of years is that folks that were adamant about staying put and staying in their home, and we've all heard the story, carry me out of here in a box, that the dialogue has started opening up is they're evaluating this aspect of that. And if even though you want to stay in that home for 40 years, if it really is kind of lonely and isolating, maybe it's time to either look at outside choices, but if you want to make it happen in your home, it could take some effort, and coordination and having a team,
Yeah, and I think that team piece is a key. I think just really evaluating both the care recipient's social support, social network that they have, and your own as the caregiver, and just considering, is it enough? Do we have the social network in place that we need to provide the support that's going to be necessary, not just now, but down the road? I mean, a lot of times when someone starts to, their health starts to decline and they start to become more housebound, people are there and they're willing to help, and they're reaching out and they're showing up for a while, but then that starts to dwindle, and that's just natural. And the support network that they may have had, whether it's through church or different organizations and hobbies that they had, as they start to withdraw and they don't show up to those things anymore, it's like eventually that network starts to dwindle down. And so just evaluating how strong that network is, and then doing your best to maintain it, making sure that even if mom or dad isn't going to the senior center like they were, keep in touch with them, let them know what's going on, see what resources they have. As you said, they've gotten really creative with bringing resources out into the community in light of the pandemic. So find out what other alternate options there are. Find out if there's transportation available to, bring them to different functions if they can't drive anymore. Just doing our best as the caregivers to try and maintain those relationships as best as we can, even when it becomes, harder and harder for our loved one to go out.
Yeah. And Angela, I'm going to give you the gold star on questions today. You've really thrown some really good ones into the mix. And she wonders, and I have some thoughts on this, but I'm curious about yours too, Pam, is how have you overcome stubbornness in our loved ones when it's clear that aging in place is not the best option, but the resistance to move and leave is very great? Any words of wisdom?
Well, again, yeah, I mean, it's so common. And the individual situations, circumstances play in a lot, but, there are some ways that you can approach and talk to an older adult about just having a backup plan. We're not saying that you can't stay home. We want to support that decision. We want to support that wish. And we're going to do everything we can to do it. We're going to bring in professionals. We're going to, evaluate the home safety. We're going to, retrofit it if we can, have a home care option in place. We're going to have a plan for that. And that's plan A. But, we need a plan B. What if something happens? What if, what if someone, mom or dad falls and breaks a hip and can't go up the stairs? Just trying to work, honestly, with or without their input, having that backup plan in place. If they just simply won't engage in that, work with a care manager, come up with your own plan B. And then, it's at the time comes when the crisis hits, you can present it to them. But you don't necessarily have to have their buy-in before that, right? So the plan B is crucial, and having that team of professionals that knows what the resources are and how to access them when you need it is, I think that's my biggest piece of advice there.
Yeah, when there's great tidbits in there. I like telling this one story when these questions come in of this call that I had. It was an adult daughter and really concerned about mom. She felt like she really needed assisted living. She had selected 3 places, but mom was digging her heels into the sand, and she was commiserating with me on the phone. And she said, yeah, her excuse is, I was a college professor. I can't live in these places. And I said to the daughter, I said, well, what'd she teach in college? And she was a theater teacher. And I said, try this, call those 3 places and see if any of the 3 would be willing to do some outreach to the local high school theater departments and maybe develop a partnership or something like that. And she was all excited, called me back the next day that one of the communities actually already was doing this, that the kids would come over and rehearse on a weekly basis in front of the residents.
Yeah.
And they told mom about this program, and this person that had put her heels in was sort of like, oh, wow. And I think I like sharing this story because there are creative ways to enable us to have purpose. I think a lot of times the problem is that I've got memories and purpose here in my home, and I'm not going to have that there. But once the light bulb went on, she realized me staying alone at home I'm missing an opportunity now. And so just one little thought there. Okay,
I think there's sorry, just one more thought.
Oh, no,
I think there's just a stigma attached to senior living that a lot of older adults have, because they don't really know how much it has changed and how far it's come and what options are out there. And so I think, in terms of creating this plan B, well, let's just go see what the options are. Like, we're not signing an admission agreement. We're not saying you're ever going to move in. We're not making a deposit, but let's just go take stock of what the options are, and, just see what preferences you might have if you are ever faced with needing to make this decision. And sometimes just knowing that, the nursing home that they have in their mind, from when they were growing up is not necessarily the type of community we're talking about. There's so many different types of communities out there and different options, and just, having them be a part of that process of just, discovering that, and being able to make the choice, the choices themselves. For some people that could be an attractive option as well.
I love it. And Pam, you got a lot of fans on LinkedIn. I want to acknowledge those folks there. They're saying hi and connecting with us. And we are, I'm looking at the clock. We're winding down to the top of the hour, and we've got basically, 2 chapters, the financial and caring for the caregiver. On the financial aspect, man, we touched on it with Medicaid and things like that, but what are some of your thoughts on that aspect of coping, of caregiving with confidence?
Yeah, I ended the book with the financial chapter on purpose, because it's so many of the other decisions that you make hinge on what financial resources are available. And there's only so much you can do, but the sooner you take stock of it and really have just have your arms around it, what resources are available, what our options are, the better planning you can do. So I'm hoping that by ending the book it'll be fresh on their mind and people will start with it. You have to work within the resources that your care recipient has to find the best quality option at that price point. I mean, that's the bottom line. There's only so much you can do to stretch the resources so far. But there are some creative things that are out there. There are, creative solutions that a lot of financial planners and advisors can help with. So getting professional advice and starting that conversation early is critical. And there's just a lot of instances where people just don't understand, the difference between private pay services and Medicare and Medicaid. And so just kind of educating yourself, on the front end about the different buckets and how they work is going to help you understand your options and avoid disappointments later when you don't know what you can afford. So it's a bear, it's one of the most difficult subjects to tackle. But it's best to really take a full, stock of the resources, assets, and liabilities that your care recipient has up front. Again, just to, avoid the crisis and the disappointments on the back end.
Yeah, and I want to put in a plug for a very unique business that happens to be a positive aging community champion, and it's the Life Care Affordability Plan. But what I'm going to drop into chat is a discussion that we did last week with somebody that, the husband had understood all the finances. He got dementia. The wife had to come in and sort of figure out what they had and how she navigated all that. It's a great story, and it links to how the Life Care Affordability Plan could work for you if that's a resource. But, Pam, when I think about the heartbreaking caregiver calls that I take, and this goes back to another line in the sand, it's where, okay, mom doesn't have enough money. Well, I guess I got to start paying for this stuff and sacrificing their kids' college, their own retirement. Setting limits, I guess, is really a very important thing when you're in this situation.
Yeah, that's right. And I do address that in the book as well, and just understanding what your limits and responsibilities are as a caregiver. And then also knowing, what you can claim on your taxes and what, that kind of thing. I mean, people don't have a good understanding of that. So again, talking it through with the professionals, a tax professional, a financial advisor, even an elder law attorney, like these different, professions can help you evaluate all of that and come up with a plan so that you don't end up, expending all of your resources as well.
So, and I know we're getting close to wrapping things up, but since we're on this topic, another concern that a lot of people have is that it's like, you talk about advanced care planning and what have you, and they go and talk to an attorney and they hear about the fees and everything like that. And then they go on LegalZoom or they look at some prepackaged thing to sort of check the box that I did this.
Yeah.
I imagine from your vantage point, you've seen both ends of the spectrum.
Absolutely.
And any thoughts on sort of balancing the expense of hiring an attorney to guide you versus not doing anything at all or trying to do it on your own with templates and things like that?
Right. Sometimes trying to do it on your own is worse than not doing anything at all, to be honest, because, it really can trip you up and put you in some situations that you don't want to be in. Hiring an attorney or hiring professionals to help you plan in advance, whether it's an attorney, whether it's an aging life care manager, whoever that professional is, their fees are worth it. Trust me, because, the legal trouble and the financial burden you can end up with on the back end is so much greater than the cost of advice. And I think it translates over. I mean, people aren't afraid to pay for a consultant or professional advice in a lot of other areas of their life. Why not aging? I mean, this is one of the biggest, responsibilities that we're going to have. And I think just shifting that mindset to paying for good advice on the front end to avoid the pitfalls later is the way we need to go.
Great. All right. Well, referring back to the chapter, I'm pretty impressed that we got through the book, and this was a great discussion. Really addressing a lot of different things. We did touch briefly on caring for the caregiver with the comment from the personal trainer. But any additional thoughts on, things that people can be thinking about in terms of you're on this journey and taking care of yourself?
Yeah, and just some general advice expanding on what we talked about earlier. Caregiving stress is tremendous, and 1 in 5 people in America is a caregiver now, and that's just growing every day. 10,000 people a day turn 65, and so as we face this as a nation, we need to realize that supporting caregivers is crucial part of the conversation. We need to work together as a team, and I think caregivers need to be mindful of their own boundaries and make sure that they do put a support network in place up front. Asking for help is critical, because people don't, if they don't know you need help, they're not looking for the signs. You have to be the one to speak up, and you have to ask. Being mindful of self-care, keeping up with your own medical appointments and physical health, exercise, as was mentioned earlier, even just taking time to do the things that you enjoy, that re-energize you, whether it's time to yourself to read or whatever it is. Just making sure that you carve out that time for yourself. Doesn't have to be a lot of time. Sometimes it's not possible to be a lot of time, but prioritizing that in whatever ways that you can. And then process your feelings. This is one thing I address in the book, and I want to point out today is caregivers have feelings. Sometimes they're very overwhelming. It can be quite an emotional roller coaster. It's almost like going through the stages of grief, right? Like there's a lot of different feelings that you have to process throughout your journey. And so speaking with a therapist, prioritizing mental health, and working through those feelings in a healthy way is really one of the biggest pieces of advice I can give.
Man, what a great discussion, and a great way to kind of put a bow on this conversation today, Pam. I really admire everything that you've done. I hope that you are an inspiration to other folks to follow in your footsteps of having this very interesting and diverse career, and seeing how you can better serve individuals by doing that.
Yeah.
And it certainly makes your life more interesting, doesn't it?
Yeah, like you said, it's been really just a natural progression along the way, and I'm honored to have worked with every client I've met, and hope that I can use what I've learned in their stories to help others. So thank you, Steve.
I love it. All right, folks. Well, I guess we won't be seeing you until January, and I've got a bunch of really cool programs planned for us in January. So I hope everybody has a safe and happy holiday season. Don't feel free to reach out to me in the interim, and this will be recorded. It'll be up on our website this afternoon, along with all that chat and information to get Pam's books and what have you. And again, thank you to Pam, and thank you for everybody with all these great questions. And we'll see you soon. All righty.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.